life might have settled back into an almost normal routine. The toys were no longer active reminders. Emma still enjoyed her dolls and sandpile with a thoroughly explicable delight. Scott was satisfied with baseball and his chemical set. They did everything other children did and evinced few, if any, flashes of abnormality. But Holloway seemed to be an alarmist. He was having the toys tested with rather idiotic results. The box itself, with its cryptic machinery, told nothing. Fusing had melted too much of the stuff into slag. But the toys... It was the random element that baffled investigation. Even that was a matter of semantics, for Holloway was convinced that it wasn't really random. There just weren't enough known factors. No adult could work the abacus, for example, and Holloway thoughtfully refrained from letting a child play with the thing. The crystal cube was similarly cryptic. It showed a mad pattern of colors, which sometimes moved. In this it resembled a kaleidoscope, but the shifting of a balance and gravity didn't affect it. Again, the random factor, or rather the unknown, the X pattern. Eventually, Paradine and Jane slipped back into something like complacence, with a feeling that the children had been cured of their mental quirk now that the contributing cause had been removed. Certain of the actions of Emma and Scott gave them every reason to quit worrying. For the kids enjoyed swimming, hiking, movies, games, the normal functional toys of this particular time sector. It was true that they failed to master certain puzzling mechanical devices which involved some calculation. A three-dimensional jigsaw globe Paradine had picked up, for example, but he found that difficult himself. Once in a while, there were lapses. Scott was hiking with his father one Saturday afternoon, and the two had paused at the summit of a hill. Beneath them, a rather lovely valley was spread. Pretty, isn't it? Paradine remarked. Scott examined the scene gravely. It's all wrong, he said. I don't know. What's wrong with it? Gee. Scott lapsed into puzzled silence. I don't know. The children had missed their toys, but not for long. Emma recovered first, though Scott still moped. He held unintelligible conversations with his sister and studied meaningless scrawls she drew on paper he supplied. It was almost as though he was consulting her and into difficult problems beyond his grasp. If Emma understood more, Scott had more real intelligence and manipulatory skill as well. He built a gadget with his mechanoset that was dissatisfied. The apparent cause of his dissatisfaction was exactly why Paradine was relieved when he viewed the structure. It was the sort of thing a normal boy would make, vaguely reminiscent of a cubistic ship. It was a bit too normal to please Scott. He asked Emma more questions, though in private. She thought for a time, then made more scrawls with an awkwardly clutched pencil. Can you read this stuff? Jane asked her son one morning. Not read it exactly. I can tell what she means. Not all the time, but mostly. Is it writing? No. It doesn't mean what it looks like. Symbolism? Paradine suggested over his coffee. Jane looked at him, her eyes widening. Denny... He winked and shook his head. Later, when they were alone, he said, Don't let Holloway upset you. I'm not implying that the kids are corresponding in an unknown tongue. If Emma draws a squiggle and says it's a flower, that's an arbitrary rule. Scott remembers that. Next time she draws the same sort of squiggle or tries to, well, sure, Jane said doubtfully. Have you noticed Scott's been doing a lot of reading lately? I noticed. Nothing unusual, though. No Kant or Spinoza. He browses, that's all. Well, so did I at his age, Paradine said, and went off to his morning classes. He lunched with Holloway, which was becoming a daily habit, and spoke of Emma's literary endeavors. Was I right about symbolism, Rex? The psychologist nodded. Quite right. Our own language is nothing but arbitrary symbolism now, at least in its application. Look here. On his napkin, he drew a very narrow ellipse. What's that? You mean, what does that represent? Yes. What does it suggest to you? It could be a crude representation of what? Oh, plenty of things, Paradine said. Rim of a glass, fried egg, a loaf of French bread, a cigar. Holloway added a little triangle to his drawing, apex joined to one end of the ellipse. He looked up at Paradine. A fish, the latter said instantly. Our familiar symbol for a fish, even without fins, eyes, or mouth. It's recognizable because we've been conditioned to identify this particular shape with our mental picture of a fish, the basis of a rebus, a symbol to us means a lot more than what we actually see on paper. What's in your mind when you look at this sketch? Why, a fish. Keep going. What do you visualize? Everything. Scales, Paradine said slowly, looking into space. Water, foam, a fish's eye, the fins, the colors. So, the symbol represents a lot more than just the abstract idea of fish. Note the connotations, that of a noun, not a verb. It's harder to express actions by symbolism, you know. Anyway, reverse the process. Suppose you want to make a symbol for some concrete noun, say bird. Draw it. Paradine drew two connected arcs, concavities down. The lowest common denominator. Holloway nodded. The natural tendency is to simplify, especially when a child is seeing something for the first time and has few standards of comparison. He tries to identify the new thing with what already is familiar to him. Ever notice how a child draws the ocean? He didn't wait for an answer. He went on. A series of jagged points like the oscillating line of a seismograph. When I first saw the Pacific, I was about 3. I remember it very clearly. It looked tilted. A flat plane slanted at an angle. The waves were regular triangles, apex upward. Now, I didn't see them stylized that way, but later, remembering, I had to find some familiar standard of comparison, which is the only way of getting any conception of an entirely new thing. The average child tries to draw these regular triangles, but his coordination's poor. He gets a seismograph pattern, all of which means what? A child sees the ocean. He stylizes it. He draws a certain definite pattern symbolic to him of the sea. Emma scrawls maybe symbols too. I don't mean that the world looks different to her, brighter perhaps, and sharper, more vivid, with a slackening of perception above her eye level. What I do mean is that her thought processes are different, that she translates what she sees into abnormal symbols. You still believe? Yes, I do. Her mind has been conditioned unusually. It may be that she breaks down what she sees into simple, obvious patterns and realizes a significance to those patterns that we can't understand. Like the abacus. She saw a pattern in that, though to us it was completely random. Paradine abruptly decided to taper off these luncheon engagements with Holloway. The man was an alarmist. His theories were growing more and more fantastic than ever. He dragged in anything, applicable or not, that would support them. Rather sardonically, he said, "Do you mean Emma's communicating with Scott in an unknown language? In symbols for which she hasn't any words. I'm sure Scott understands a great deal of those scrawls. To him, an isosceles triangle may represent any factor, though probably a concrete noun. Would a man who knew nothing of chemistry understand what H2O meant? Would he realize that that symbol could evoke a picture of the ocean?" Paradine didn't answer. Instead, he mentioned to Holloway Scott's curious remark that the landscape from the hill had looked all wrong. A moment later, he was inclined to regret his impulse, for the psychologist was off again. Scott's thought patterns are building up to a sum that doesn't equal this world. Perhaps he's subconsciously expecting to see the world where those toys came from. Paradine stopped listening. Enough was enough. The kids were getting along all right, and the only remaining disturbing factor was Holloway himself. That night, however, Scott evinced an interest, later significant, in eels. There was nothing apparently harmful in natural history. Paradine explained about eels. "But where do they lay their eggs? Or do they?" "Well, that's still a mystery. Their spawning grounds are unknown. Maybe the Sargasso Sea, or the deeps, where the pressure can help them force the young out of the bodies." "Funny," Scott said, thinking deeply. "Salmon do the same thing, more or less. They go up rivers to spawn." Paradine went into detail. Scott was fascinated. "But that's right, Dad. They're born in the river, and when they learn how to swim, they go down to the sea. And then they come back to lay their eggs, huh?" "Right. Only they wouldn't come back. They just send their eggs." "Well, it would take a very long ovipositor," Paradine said, and vouchsafed some well-chosen remarks upon oviparity. His son wasn't entirely satisfied. "Flowers," he contended, "sent their seeds long distances, but they don't guide them. Not many find fertile soil." Flowers haven't got brains, though, Dad. Why do people live here? Glendale? No, here, this whole place. It isn't all there is, I bet. Do you mean other planets? Scott was hesitant. This is only part of the big place. It's like the river where the salmon go. Why don't people go down to the ocean when they grow up? Paradine realized that Scott was speaking figuratively. He felt a brief chill. The ocean? In the latter half of the 19th century, an Englishman sat on a grassy bank near a stream. A very small girl lay near him, staring up at the sky.